folk are still coming over. Yeah, so welcome everyone to this event. I'd say it's a unique event for lots of reasons. Hosted by ourselves, Future Work Scotland, in collaboration with our fellow meetup groups, Lean Agile Edinburgh, Lean Agile Glasgow, and Heart of Agile Scotland have all supported us, collaborated with us, helped promote it, and bring all you fine folks here today. We've done a lot of virtual events, so we've not done one of these in quite some time. So it's really nice to be here and see real people. You're all three-dimensional, which is kind of nice. So it's good to be back in person doing this sort of stuff. It's taken a while. Just, I guess, the usual formalities. I guess I didn't even introduce myself for those of you who know me. So I'm Sathpal Singh. Everybody calls me Sath. I'm the organiser at Future Work Scotland, and Donald's here somewhere. There's Donald. So Donald's my co-organiser at Future Work Scotland. Stephen's there at the back. He's at Lean Agile Edinburgh. Laz, I saw Laz somewhere. I didn't speak to Laz. There's Laz. So yeah, there's a bunch of us here, and I'm going to ask our wonderful panellists to introduce themselves shortly when we kick off. Just, I guess, the usual formalities, which is different to when we do this virtually, obviously. If there is a fire alarm, there's no tests planned, I'm told, by our wonderful host this evening at Global Logic. Alan Gordon's here somewhere. I don't see him right now. He's there waving at the back there, so he's going to keep us right if the alarm does go off. I'm led to believe there are fire exits and a congregation point out the front somewhere, but fingers crossed nothing like that will happen. We've got off to a slightly slow start with a few hiccups, etc. We're all here now, so really good to be doing this. So the plan is, I'm going to hand over to Marcus in a second, who's going to do a little 5 minutes. He's got a few slides. He promises me not too many, so he wants a 5 minute just to set the scene. And then what we're planning to do is have a panel discussion between our three fine panelists who will introduce themselves in a sec. I've got a few questions prepared for them. I'll try not to be too hard on them, but I make no promises. And then what we intend to do at the end, in the last half an hour or so, is open it up to yourselves. So by then, hopefully, you've all warmed up, you've had enough pizza, you've got a few beers down you, and you've got some great questions for our panelists. And we hope to wrap up before 9, that's the intention. So yeah, that's the plan for the evening. Continue to help yourself to drinks and pizza as you see fit. I think at this point, I don't think I've got anything else to say in terms of intro. Marcus, you want to say a few words and kick off?
Thank you. Thank you, Seth, and thanks to the hosts, Alan, and the other Agile groups up here. Sorry, you on mic. Can you hear me now? There's no on button, is there? Great. So yeah, thank you again for Alan and Global Digital for hosting, and everyone else who's been supporting the Red Team Thinking road trip. We've been in London for a week, and then Bryce had a wonderful holiday touring around the Highlands, and then we've been in Edinburgh yesterday and today, and heading back to London tomorrow. So I appreciate the support, and appreciate everyone coming out as well for one of the first meetups that's live for quite a long time. So that's really great. So I'll just kick off with, I just want to sort of set the scene and talk about the scale of the challenge that we're facing today. And if you read that quote, this came from Ian Conn, who's the CEO of Centrica, which is British Gas Utilities. And this was a quote pre-COVID. And what he was saying and realizing is that the way the world is moving now, it's moving so fast and it's so complex that individuals can't deal with this anymore. And neither can individual C-suites. And this is something that people now need to be engaged and embraced and enabled to do to support what's going on in the world because it's moving so fast. Anybody heard of the phrase VUCA? I won't say my Yorkshire accent because people get offended, but VUCA. And you can see here what it stands for. And it comes from the late US Army War College in late 80s, 85 onwards. But it's become more of a buzzword recently in the boardrooms because it's the nature of the world we're facing into. This is the new normal. And then the H added at the end there is hyperconnectivity, because everything we now do is instantly transmissible, instantly available across the internet. Activities happening across the globe are having impacts in our families and our homes. So all of this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity is what Ian Conn referred to as how that's so difficult to lead and manage, and then hyperconnect all of that. And that's why we're really facing into a struggling domain. That's good old tech. Can you hit the next slide for a sec? Go on then. We knew this was never going to work.
Which button am I pressing?
Just down.
All right.
And obviously this is leading to businesses failing. Most of it, as you can see, those things there are self-inflicted wounds. While we think the market and the competition might be a major offender of how we run our businesses, the most of the time these are internal issues that cause us to fail. And there's a few there. But not to worry, there's this new way of working out there. Not so new, it's been around 20 years, but it's new to some companies. Agile is saving the day. However, there's a major problem with Agile, as many people in this room are probably aware of. It's become sort of so ubiquitous, it's meaningless, and it's become many things to many people and therefore causing confusion. And the wonderful consultants who provide us with maps like this was 2016. This is 6 years old. So you can see why people like Ian Conn and other executives and organizations are struggling with what this all means to them, because there's so many flavors of it out there. Go on, Sat, step up.
Sorry.
That's all right, mate.
Stop the mark, yeah.
Thank you.
There we are. Stop sleeping.
So despite what they're sold to from many of the organizations out there, Agile is not the silver bullet. It's one entity, it's one enabler of many things that we now need going forward. Thanks. And here's a real problem. All these new ways of working, and there's just a few there, but you saw many on that tube map, they don't work. And it's not that they're bad ways of working, it's not that they're ineffective, but they're being misapplied. Because these things then fail at a grand scale. Go back one. And still, 20 years on, 75 to 80% of agile transformations, digital transformations, large-scale change programs are continuing to fail. That's quite a high rate. There's a lot of investment gone into all of those things for not a lot of ROI, return on investment. Go on, next one. So what we need is business agility. And again, here's the confusion. Agile sounds like agility, so surely they're the same thing. But they're not. They're very different. So what we need to do is understand business agility, unlock that capability in our organizations. And that doesn't mean we've just got frontline teams doing Scrum, therefore we're all hashtags totes agile. Right? That's not the way that you get this organizational shift and change that we need. What we need to do is engage critical thinking. Okay, as Einstein said, the problems that we created when we created them can't be solved with the same thinking that we applied at that time. We need to evolve our mindset and our capabilities in the thinking domain. Go on then.
It's implemental, isn't
It is. And put simply, we believe that 21st century ways of working, and you saw many of them, don't work with 20th century ways of thinking. The old school business mindset of the 80s and 90s isn't going to work, and probably why Agile isn't working so well, because of that problem. And if you look at the Business Agility Institute, their report from the last 3 years, the #1 challenge, leadership. It's not ways of working, it's not methods, it's not frameworks, it's not funding, it's leadership, because that mindset hasn't shifted. So we need, what it says here is diversity of thought. And this is how we face these challenges together. We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. Often that just becomes tokenism, because diversity without inclusion is delusion. And if you're not including your people in your workplace, then you are missing the most capable asset that you have. So bringing that diversity of thought, engaging critical thinking, and enabling your teams, devolving that decision-making down to the lowest common denominator, where the information moves the fastest and decisions can be made, is how you survive in today's complex world. So technology, consumer behaviors has all shifted at a pace. We've seen this in the last 20, 10, 5 years, 1 year. Even yesterday, things are moving at such a rapid pace. But the leadership isn't keeping up. Okay? It's continuing to struggle. You can teach an old dog new tricks, as you can see there, but there's still very much a command and control mindset. There's still very much the fear factor. There's a lack of trust. There's an inability to delegate through our organizations, which is why this is still the #1 challenge. Many leadership styles out there, again, like the roadmap for the tubes and Agile. Consultants will tell you the different types of leadership out there. They can train you on each one of them. But you can't be one thing anymore. One size doesn't fit all. Cookie cutters don't cut it. You have to be pretty much all of those things. And what we think is you require adaptive leadership. So to unlock business agility, you need to engage critical thinking and have adapted leadership. And that's not just the leaders at the top. Leadership is something that all of us and everyone can do, from your newest intern to the retiring chairman of the board. It's a capability that you need to unleash, and if you do that, that will unlock business agility for your organization. So that's the intro. Cool. Just goes back to the start slide. That's it. Hopefully that sets the scene and gives you an idea of what the questions are about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marcus. No. You guys share that. I've got my own. Yeah. There you go. So you have to hand it around. That was great. Fantastic. So that sets the scene for us. We're going to explore some aspects of that now for the next 30 minutes or so. And then we're going to open up to yourself so you can ask these fine gents some questions. So I think where I'd like to start, and I think it's...
Should we introduce ourselves?
Yes, sorry, you haven't done that yet.
No.
I do apologise. It's a terrible, right? Shows you how long it's been since we've done this in person. Right, can you start wherever you want?
I'm pretty All right.
There you go.
We're a bit rusty.
I'm Pritam Chida. I'm a lecturer at Edinburgh Napier University. I'm very interested in agile coaches and how they coach. I'm also interested in culture, the culture of agile. I love the T-shirt at the back there, culture eats strategy. And I'm also interested in the organisational changes that are necessary to implement agile and to move agile forward.
Marcus Dimbleby, 20 plus years in the Royal Air Force, then became a consultant for my sins, then moved into agility, was head of agile at Lloyds Bank, then continuous improvement at Royal Bank of Scotland, now NatWest Group, and then I met the fine gentleman to my left about 3 years ago, and I've moved across to Red Team Thinking, where I'm the vice president and supporting Bryce in our endeavours to change people's thinking.
Thank you. Hello. I am Bryce Hoffman. I'm the president of Red Team Thinking, the author of the book Red Teaming, among others, and I am eager to hear your questions and your questions. Thank you very much.
You hold on to it because I'm going to start with you, Bryce, because that's very convenient. So I think to begin with, there's a lot for us to kind of unpack based on what Marcus just touched upon. And I'm sure you'll support us with a whole bunch of questions later. So I think one of the things that'd be good to start with is we talk a lot about psychological safety. Nonetheless, I'm deliberately starting here. And trust and safety within our organisations to be able to challenge and help move things forward in the right direction. And they feel like buzzwords, sadly. In this VUCA environment that we're talking about, we do have challenges around trying to create that environment of trust. And we're often going at great pace. How do we effectively feel like one team and create trust within a team? Bryce?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's a very important question, because if you don't have trust in your team, then you're not going to have, if you're a leader and you don't have, if your team doesn't trust you or they don't trust each other, you're not going to know as a leader what's really going on in your organization. You're not going to hear the things that you need to hear as a leader in order to lead your organization. And if there's not trust in your organization as a member of a team, you're not going to have the confidence that you need to bring your best game every day to work, because you're not going to know for sure what the mission is if you're being set up, if somebody else has got your back. And it's very hard to have even a moderately successful team without trust. But how do you develop trust? That is the big question. Particularly today, when so many organizations are plagued with careerism, with internal politics, with all sorts of downward pressures that make people kind of entrench themselves in their part of the organization, to watch their back, to cover their asses, whatever term you want. And so Red Team Thinking, one of the reasons that I wrote this book and why we started developing this is to create a methodology, a practice, if you will, that fosters trust, that opens the lines of communications, that encourages transparency within an organization, encourages everyone to speak up. And if you're in a situation where people don't feel safe to do that, to use the training wheels of anonymity to make that happen. So what do I mean by that? Well, in a perfect world, we'd just be able to sit and have a frank and open conversation on our teams, right? But if you're not in a perfect world, if you don't trust your boss, if your boss doesn't trust you, if you're the boss and you don't trust your employees, whatever it is, you need training wheels. Just like when we were kids and we learned how to ride bicycles. If we had just gone tooling out of the garage on two wheels, we probably would have ended up in a bad way. So, at least in, where I grew up, your parents put wheels on the side of your bike so that you learned how to ride safely. We do the same thing when there isn't psychological safety by using a series of tools that are very simple and easy to use, but they use anonymized feedback so that people are able to share their things without worrying about getting blamed for saying the wrong thing. But here's the cool thing that happens when you do that. Once people start sharing openly and honestly, it's liberating. People are like, yes, now the truth is getting out. And I'll give you an example of this. I was working, one of the first major companies that I piloted these tools with was not a company, was the Development Bank of Japan. And the Development Bank of Japan, one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, is a very hierarchical organization. I was working with the senior leadership, with the managing directors and some of their subordinates. And I taught them some of these tools to share their concerns about projects anonymously. And during the first break, one of the executives came up to me and he said, "I'm going to sleep so much better tonight." I said, "Really? Why?" And he said, "Because I have been so worried for the past 2 months about something with the project that we were analyzing today using your tools, and I could not say anything about it because it was my boss's project. But using the tools, I was able to raise my concerns, and then everyone else in the room saw them and shared my concerns, and then the boss was like, yes, we need to act on this." He didn't feel like he was being put on the spot either, so he felt good about it. And so that's why I say it's like training tools. Once people see that it works, then it's easier to do it without the training tools because people see the value of open and honest communication. So I think in a lot of cases, I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but you need to develop you need to develop psychological safety just the same way that you develop your muscles weightlifting or something. If you don't have it, you need to start simply with ways that kind of insulate you from hurting yourself until you have it. But once you have it, it's very hard to go back.
Absolutely. Trust is absolutely crucial. Many of you have come across Patrick Lencioni's The Trust Pyramid, so you can see from that the bottom layer is trust, upon which everything is built. So the usual things, being able to fail and not being criticized for it, these are the usual typical indicators of what represents trust. But I'd like to just shift it a little bit and say that leadership depends very much on developing a relationship with the people that you're leading and being part of that team and identifying with that team. And this is prevalent in an academic text co-authored by a guy called Steve Reicher. Has anybody heard of Steve Reicher? He's advising the Scottish Government on the COVID response. I recommend you look at his book. It's called The New Psychology of Leadership. And what he says is that in order to be effective leader, we've neglected the followers. Yeah, you've got to be doing it for the people who are basically you're trying to get to do something. And he talks about leadership is actually making people want to do something, not getting them to do it, but making them want to do something. And he says that if you have to resort to incentives, if you have to resort to punishment, that's a failure of leadership. Yeah. So that's the thing I would say is that one of the things I think is important. We need to look at how leaders develop relationships with their followers. Yeah. And I think that engenders trust.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just sort of riff off both of those, really. So you mentioned Patrick Lencioni, which is another great book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and that bottom foundation is trust, and the one above that is healthy conflict. And in this sort of day and age we live in now, everyone needs to be nice, everyone needs to be kind, and therefore we can't challenge. We can't be sharp-elbowed at work and have good discourse because, it's just frowned upon. But if you don't have that healthy challenge and discourse amongst your colleagues, amongst your peers, amongst your executives, then you're not going to be innovating. There's no creativity. And you can see organizations where mediocrity is the norm because people are like, oh, I've got and they don't get listened to. And there's nothing more demoralizing than that. And that's a failure of leadership. And we did a great podcast with a CSO, Chief Security Officer, called Mick Paisley recently. And he said, I'm a 57-year-old guy. So when I started work, there were no phones, no computers, things have changed. And he's got 4 generations of people working below him now. And it was great when we were talking, wasn't it? And he kept saying, my leaders and my leaders. And I was like, Mick, what do you mean my leaders? He goes, well, I'm not the leader. I have leaders working for me whose my job is to enable them to do this thing that they need to do. And I need to listen to them because the young guys and gals coming in at 18, 19 doing tech work, I don't know what's going on in the world. I'm employing them because they're amazing and they make us all look good. And I have to cascade that capability up. So the leader below him is leading and there's followers, but then you cascade that all the way down again. And he said he was spending between 60 and 90 minutes a day self-learning. For an executive of that age to say that that's what he's doing, that shows he's not one of these struggling, stale old leaders. He's aware of the environment. And it goes back to that healthy conflict and challenge. He brought us in to work with his teams to stimulate them to challenge him. Because they were looking at him going, what do we do? And he's like, don't look at me. I have no idea. That's why I employ all of you. But none of them were getting on. They were all being too nice. And he promoted this healthy conflict, even without trust. Because as Bryce said, you can create an organization, an environment where the trust develops through challenge. And if they're all challenging each other and having good discourse and good discussion and conflict in the right professional way, then it soon starts to drop that shield of, I can't speak, and you become more open, you have good challenge, and you get far better outcomes because of that, and the trust builds, rather than you must have trust. And worked in a bank a few years ago, and one executive said to me, we're talking about psychological safety. He goes, Marcus, you mentioned it, the buzzword. Oh, yes, don't worry. We have that here. I'm like, nice. I said, how do you know? He goes, because I told them they do. And he was dead serious. And so I went and did a bit of a deep dive across the teams, came back 3 days later. I said, I hate to break this to you. I said, but your teams are fearful. They don't speak up. They're working in stovepipes in isolation, often individually, because they're fearful. And it wasn't him. But there was this permafrost layer where bad news wasn't going up, filtration was coming down, and it was causing a major ripple in the organization, and he was oblivious to it. And it wasn't until we had that conversation and helped him understand what he needed to do and who he needed to go and see and speak to that you start to peel back these layers and see where in these many-layered organizations these cracks are forming, which people are often oblivious to. And if you can't speak up, then how are they going to find out? So that's what we try and help people do.
Fantastic. Just mic-wise, just to support our live stream for our audience who are joining around the globe. So I think you just keep it consistent. I think they'll wave it around basically like a wand is what I'm advised. There we go. So just building on that then, so a lot of good stuff there to get us moving. I guess where there's not trust, where trust is really lacking, you likely end up in a toxic environment. We talk a lot about toxic cultures and all this stuff. It's quite prevalent, isn't it? I think you recently both did a podcast episode kind of focusing on that a little bit. So before I move into something completely different, it'd be great to hear all of your perspectives on what is it leaders really need to learn to try to avoid that type of culture. The learning needs have changed for leaders. If you were all to say one thing that leaders need to be learning, what would that be? So whoever wants to start, you're holding the mic.
I'll start, and I'll just say one word. Listen. We'll build off that.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, but I would say, to put even a finer point on it, what leaders need to learn is that listening is not a threat to your leadership. Listening is not a sign that you are a weak leader. Listening is not a sign that you are not an effective leader. Listening is a sign that you are a competent leader. Listening is a sign of a leader who is actually doing their job, which is, if you think about it, there's a story that I really think illustrates this powerfully. Andrew Carnegie, a great Scottish American, 120 years ago, was asked. He was the greatest steel magnate of the day, the richest man in the world at one point, and he was asked by a New York newspaper man, Mr. Carnegie, what do you know about making steel that no one else in the world knows that's made you so wealthy? He said, I don't know anything about making steel. I know how to find people who are the best in their field and listen to them. That's what a real leader does. That's the sign of a confident leader, is somebody who's able to build a great team and to listen to that team, synthesize the knowledge they learn from that team, and then execute based on that knowledge. That's real leadership. But today, too often, we see leaders who think that they need to prove themselves as leaders, and that the way that they prove that they are the leader is that they come in with all the answers and they tell people, this is how it's going to be. This is what we're going to do. Real leaders understand that you need to seek understanding before you seek to be understood. You need to listen before you speak. That's a powerful leader. So I think that the biggest piece of advice that I have to leaders is to recognize that listening to your teams does not make you a weak leader. It makes you a strong leader.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm in danger of turning into this kind of, I agree with Nick situation. I think, absolutely agree. I would say, the phrase that, the succinct phrase is do it for the team, do it for them. And there's, they say it's all about we together doing something. So I think that focus of the team, of the leader, should be on the team, and to basically diminish the gap, or if there is a gap, is to be, to close that gap and be as close to the team as possible.
Yeah, and I'll just build off that again, talking about listening. And again, Mick, who we talked about earlier, he said, I have these leaders working for me, to me, under me, whatever the hierarchical construct says. He said, but I see myself as the architect of the environment. And I thought it was just a great phrase. So as a leader, the leader over all of it, he said, it's my job to create, to architect, to construct the environment for all of these people within it to grow, to learn, to flourish. And for me to listen, they have to be able to speak up. He said, when I first got and walked in there, people were like silent because of the previous experiences they'd had. They wouldn't speak up. And it took a while for that to be surfaced, but he had to architect it. This thing takes physical action. It doesn't just happen by you saying the buzzword that you read on the business news coming in that morning. You have to physically do things. You have to change behaviors to enable your people to speak up so that you can actually listen to them and actively listen. Not just, yeah, I heard you, like your mum does to you sometimes. You've got to physically, actively listen to what these people say and then take action on that. And that might just be mean empowering them to take the action themselves, or you doing something about it. But you've got to have that two-way flow of listening, talking, and enabling that as an environmental capability.
Just to pick up Marcus's point on active listening, I'm just wondering if, when we're having a conversation, we're so busy trying to prepare our own answers, we're not actually listening to what the other person is saying. So I think, actually listen without thinking about what your response is going to be and what anecdote that you're going to tell. I think that's actually key, and that's a really important part of listening.
So basically all I heard was listen, listen, listen. Okay. So just building on that then, you talked about architecting the right environment, Marcus. I like that. So in the context of decision making, which again we're talking about creating the right cultures, they come from the top, how can we look at creating more devolved decision making across organisations? So, we want clarity, we seek clarity, we want to build capability and create a thriving culture. What are the main blockers to helping enable that?
Yeah, as a sort of Ian Conn quote at the beginning stated, he can't make the decisions anymore that are needed to be made. And it's not because he's incompetent, it's not because he's a bad leader or a bad CEO, it's just because of the nature of the environment. So you have to use your capability, and that capability lies within your organization. And we jokingly call ourselves unconsultants. And we come in and say, we've got no answers, we're not going to tell you how to do things, we're not going to tell you what the problems are, because they all lie within your organization. You just have to unsurface those capabilities. And by doing so, that's how you're going to get that capability surfacing back up to you to make better decisions. And then how do you make better decisions faster is by devolving that capability. In the military, we used to call it mission command. So how does a general enable the frontline corporal on the battlefield at the fight, at the forefront, to make decisions rapidly? You can't sit there and wait for the decision to go all the way back up the chain of command by a carrier pigeon and then come back down again. He's got to be making that decision as if the general is sat on his shoulder. So how do you enable that in your organization? And Sat mentioned a couple of words there. Clarity and capability. And this is a massive assumption in all organizations. And we talked about this yesterday. You go into your organization, wherever you work, ask your executives, ask yourselves, do we have clarity? I.e., do we understand two strands here? The vision, the mission, the purpose, the strategy, what we're doing, why we're doing it. Right, ask those things. And then, do we understand the situation we're facing into? When we look out the window and see the VUCA environment, what does that mean to us? What are the problems we're facing? What's the situational awareness? What's self-awareness? What's awareness of others and those around us? That's clarity. And I've yet to go in an organization who can confidently turn around and tell me we have all of that, Marcus. Number one. Number two, capability. If you have the clarity, do you have the capability to do that? And they go, oh yeah, we hired them on their CV. They've got all the tech skills needed. That's fine. But we're also talking about now cognitive capability. Hard skills and soft skills. We spend 85% of our training budget on hard skills, on tech capability and uplift. We spend very little and we focus very little on soft skills, enabling our people to think, enabling our people to have cognitive capability to challenge. So if you don't have that competence on both sides of the hard and soft skills and the clarity, then you're never going to get the culture that allows you to cascade decision-making. Because again, to cascade decision-making, I have to trust those below me who are going to make the decisions on my behalf. And if they're not clear, then it's a failing on me. If they're not skilled, that's a failing on me again as a leader. And it goes back to what Pritam was saying. That's a leadership responsibility to enable and architect that capability to exist below you so you have the culture that allows you to push that decision-making down. And then when you do that, you'll see how quickly your organization moves to do so.
I agree.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, perhaps, as an academic, as universities, we should be doing a different job. I mean, when it comes to the Q&A, are we too prescriptive with our students? Are we not teaching them enough in terms of critical thinking? Should we be doing more in that area? What should we be doing? What should we be teaching them? We try and get them to work in groups before they leave. We try and get them to all contribute, but there's a reluctance to do that. We've spent so much time worrying about plagiarism and whether people submitting their own work has to be their own work. But then when they leave university and they come to work, then there's no issues there. It's all about sharing what they're doing, and they're reluctant to do it. So, yeah.
Very good point. Nothing you want to, or you didn't want to add anything, Bryce, did you? Yeah, okay, so that's interesting to hear. So let's broaden it out further then. Diversity of thought. Okay, so here we go. So in organisations now, we're talking a lot about diversity and inclusion, and you use a nice phrase earlier. You can't have diversity without inclusion. That's an illusion, you said? Delusion. Well, I like that. So how do we go about doing that to support everything you've already said and making sure it's not just another tick box exercise? I can get the words out there.
Sure.
Starts off, Bryce.
Well, I think that this is one of the most critical issues that organizations face today. I mean, we're in a situation, we're in a world in which, rightly so, people have demanded more diversity in organizations, which is a good thing. And organizations have responded, in most cases, by increasing their diversity, at least on paper. Because the thing is that just having people in the room who look different than you doesn't do anything for the organization other than check a box that allows you to wave a piece of paper and say, we are a diverse organization. And this was really driven home to me most powerfully about a year and a half ago when we were working with the Cabinet Office in London, actually. And there were a couple of young women of color who were part of a large group that we were doing a workshop with. And after the workshop, they said to us, we would really like to help you and have you do a red team thinking workshop in the Cabinet Office around diversity and inclusion. And I said, yeah, I mean, that makes that how does it relate? I mean, I think it's an important thing, but how does this relate? And they said, well, this was the first time since we've been hired that we've been heard. We were brought in to the organization because we were women of color. And ever since we were brought in, we've been sitting in the back of the room and no one's been talking to us, no one's been listening to us, no one's been asking us our opinion. And when we share our opinion, no one's been giving it any credit. But because, as I said earlier, using tools that are anonymous, that allow everybody's voice to be heard, that move from divergent thinking to convergent thinking, that separate ideas from those who share them and allow them to be independently considered, enabled these young women's voices to be heard for the first time, they said, since they were in that organization. And this is the thing, is that the whole point of diversity is to get diversity of thought. That's the power. You know, this isn't scouting. You don't get a merit badge for diversity because you checked 3 boxes. You know, we've got one of these, therefore we get a little shiny patch on our uniforms. No, the whole point of this is to have diversity of thought, to get people not just in the room, but get them speaking, and not just get them speaking, but get them heard, and not just get them heard, but acting on what they have to say, because their perspectives, their different perspectives are powerful. And I'll give you a powerful example of this. When I was writing my book, I was talking to, at the time, the Ministry of Defense at Trivenham had a very good red teaming program. And Brigadier Tom Long then was leading it. And he told me, he said, we have a rule that our red team has to have an intern on it all the time. Now, let me explain something. What this red team was doing was analyzing Britain's war plans, was as analyzing, you know, everything to do with the British military. So I was surprised. There's a rule that we have to have an intern on this. Why is this? And he said, well, let me tell you why. He said, a couple of years ago, we were asked to do a red teaming analysis of the new HR policies for Her Majesty's Armed Forces. And at the very last minute before we began this exercise, one of my key team members had a medical emergency. And so we had a young woman from Yale who was part of an exchange program that we had. She was 24 years old. And we asked her to, since it wasn't a classified strategy or something, to sit in and take his place on the team. The second day of the analysis, she came in and she said, has anybody else noticed a major oversight in these policies? And they said, no, what have you found? And she said, there's nothing in here about unwed mothers. And the white 50-year-old men sitting across the table from her all looked at each other and said, should there be? And she said, well, you know, we're at war. This was, you know, mid-2000s when this happened. She said, we're at war, and soldiers are being deployed from the UK. Some of them are women. Some of them have children. What happens to their children when they are sent to Afghanistan or Iraq? Shouldn't there be something in here about that? And they said, oh, maybe there should. So when it came time to outbrief the results of this analysis to the senior leadership of the Ministry of Defense, this was one of their key recommendations, is we need to address the issue of what happens to the children of women who don't have anyone else to care for their children if they're deployed. And as they were giving this outbriefing, apparently a white-haired admiral whose hair matched his uniform said, are there any unwed mothers in Her Majesty's Armed Forces? And they said, well, actually, sir, you know, here's how many there are. And there is actually what turned out to be a few thousand. And he was shocked to learn this. But, they said, shocked though you may be, it's something we need to deal with. And they said that really opened their eyes to the fact that in a million years, no one else on that team would have seen that as an omission. Now think about that in business too. That type of thing happens in business all the time too. So if you just have people in the room but aren't listening to them, you're not going to get that insight. So that's why everything we do is designed to A, make sure everybody's voice is heard, B, make sure everybody's ideas is considered separate from who's sharing the ideas, and 3, to move from divergent thinking to convergent thinking so the team as a whole can converge on the best idea. Because there's a famous Japanese proverb I love, which is that none of us is as smart as all of us. And the problem with that, though, is the best idea can't win if no one ever hears it.
Wow, great story. Yeah, just building on that diversity of thought, we went out to NATO headquarters to do some military support planning just before Christmas, myself and Ellie Cloak, who's our D&I practice lead. And obviously with the build-up to Ukraine, we were going to actually help them do some red teaming of the plans and whatnot. And we got there and there was a team of 18 in the room, all your sort of hairy-butted warriors of old and colonels and lieutenant colonels with Afghanistan stripes, Iraq stripes and even longer. And we got there and said, okay, where's the team? Well, this is it. Where's the rest of the team? There must be more people. Well, here's our full team, but we don't need those in here. Why not? Bring them all in. And they wheeled in a couple of young sergeants. They wheeled in a young 21-year-old lady who was an intern from the local Portuguese college. And they wheeled in a young junior captain, a Portuguese female who just arrived that week. She'd been on site a day longer than we had. And we said, right, this will do. They're like, what? Bring them all in. We're going to use all these people all week. And we spent all week going through all the different tools and techniques, and they were out briefing the Admiral, 2-star Admiral, on Friday morning. And we went through all the different tools, all the scenarios, came out with 10 recommendations to what they were going to have to do to this plan. And the Admiral came in Friday morning with all these big, pale old men, and he sat them down, and good on the Colonel who was leading this, he stood up and said, sir, before I start, these 10 things we're talking about, I have to tell you that 5 of them came out of, ladies stand up, and the Admiral turned around, these two young ladies stood up and said, these 2 ladies came out with half of this planning. The Admiral was like, really? And he just said, how did that happen? And this young captain stepped forward and said, sir, if I'd not had these tools this week, I would not have said a word. Because of that safety in the room that didn't exist initially, and also that underconfidence that surely everyone in the room knows more than I do. What do I know? I've only been here a day, and she's just come across the road from the university. What do we know about warfighting? But they brought such a different perspective that even if they didn't have the answer, their challenge triggered a different way of thinking of the seniors to look at things from a different perspective. And as Bryce, none of us were smart as of all of us. Collectively, they came up with a far better outcome with a hybrid version. And the Admiral just said, right, in future, this is what happens. Everybody comes in the room, you don't need meat, and you use these tools and techniques, and we use everybody. And that organisation has now been absolutely fine. It's like the #1 headquarters across NATO at the moment with the way they're performing and being recognised for that. And it's not hard to do.
Cheers. I think these tools and techniques are really good for getting diversity of opinion. I think one of the things is that organisations have a tendency to perpetuate themselves. So the people that are in the organisation will recruit the people that are looking and say the right things and went to the same school and that kind of thing. So I think until we start looking at how organisations, until these people are recruited and then work their way through the system, and then they're also the ones that are doing the recruitment, I think it's quite a slow process, and I think it will change, but it is gradually changing. But I think, the problem starts at recruitment. You can have all the techniques you like within the room, but if you haven't got the right people and the diversity in the room, it's not going to make any difference.
I've got some other questions tucked away for these fine gents, but I'd be keen to give you all the chance to get involved now for a little bit. Let's take a break from me asking some questions. Are there any questions around the room? Craig's got a mic that he's happy to take around, but yeah, let's get some questions from us. Let's get you involved. Gentleman at the back there. Yeah.
Hi there, that was fantastic to hear from you, very interesting. Just picking up on your last point there, and keen to hear from the panel and anyone else in the room. how do we evolve the recruitment part of growing an organisation so that we get that diversity into the room sooner?
I think it comes down to HR. It comes down to people at the top making those decisions and percolating them down to the people actually doing the recruitment. So I think there has to be a concerted effort to do that. It's not going to happen by accident. I think there has to be a force behind that to make the change happen, and then you'll get the diversity. Then you'll stop making the same mistakes.
Yeah, I agree with Pritam there, and I think it's all of this is down to education. It's exposure. Guys like Ian Conn get this. Guys like Mick I spoke about get this. We are seeing leaders starting to get this, not at the pace they need to do. The pace is happening at the front line. So I think it's an education. It's people at the front line need to stop cowering and start stepping up and speaking up in a safe way. And we've worked in organisations where you go in and you hear, oh, the leader's doing this, the exec's doing that. And then you go and talk to the exec and they think, well, they're doing this, they're doing that. And there's no communication. You've just got to, go to the Gemba. Come together and talk to each other, cut out the multi-layers that exist and just have a conversation. Start collaborating. We're all in the agile world, collaboration's everything. But if that's not happening through the layers, and if you've got a self-organizing team down here doing their own thing without the connectivity, nobody's on their own. There's no single team that works on its own without all the impact of the organizational behaviors having an effect. So you've got to have that capability, that conduit, that mechanism to allow these observations, these questions, these challenges to come up and down and let teams see what they need to achieve and how they do that with the people they bring in. And you don't get that by applying a cookie cutter. If Consultancy X comes in with their organizational design and says, here's what you need, and you just fill it by numbers, then you're not going to get the outcome that you need. This takes thought, it takes education, and it takes engagement with each other at all levels.
No, I'm good.
Anyone else got to be on that?
What's the hands going up there?
I'm curious about that the middle layer, the permafrost, as you mentioned it, and what your thoughts are around how you break into that or break open that permafrost, especially your analogy with the front line, and that those practices that often are down on the ground, on the floor, so to speak. And curious of your experiences around that, or any sort of thoughts you have to share beyond just, oh yeah, you need a good leader at the top who's going to tell the permafrost layer what to do.
In so many organizations that I go in, you have, because look, an organization that brings someone like me in is usually an organization that's got some leadership that wants to do things different, that understands that there's challenges and wants to address those challenges. So you have people at the top of the house that sincerely want to make a positive change. And in every organization, you have a lot of people at the bottom of the house who sincerely want to make positive change. We've all been there, right? Who here has not worked in an organization where they haven't at some point known exactly what needed to be done and felt completely powerless to do anything about it? Anybody not been in that position? I didn't think so. And, so the problem is that middle layer often, because, and it's not, I'm not making a generalization. There's very good people in that middle layer, but where I see that things kind of die in a lot of large organizations is that middle layer, because people who get to that middle layer want to get to the top layer. And when you have something to lose, you start to protect yourself. And it becomes not about what's right for the business. It becomes not what's right for the team. It becomes, what do I need to do to cover my own hindquarters and to make sure that I get to the next rung of the ladder? And so the way that you cut through that, I think there's a couple of ways. One is the distributed decision-making that we were talking about before. If you push decision-making to the lowest echelon possible in an organization, and if you have senior leadership that encourages that and enables that and helps cultivate that ability, it kind of puts the people in that middle who don't want to be part of the solution in an awkward position. Because if they're just worrying about protecting themselves now that are going to be outed by that, because the people above them and the people below them are going to be making decisions, acting, trying to advance the organization. So that's one way. The other way is that educate them. Incentivize them to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Incentivize them to engage with their teams, so that I've seen this work really effectively in some organizations where individual middle level management is held, their bonuses are based in part by the scores they get from their direct reports. How engaged are those employees? How much do those employees feel like they're listened to and heard? And so you can do things like that, but it's really critical, particularly when you're dealing with a large organization. Because when you're dealing with a company or a government agency where you're dealing with 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500,000 employees, that middle layer is going to be where you succeed or fail in most cases. It's not going to be the frontline workers that cause you to fail. It may be the senior leadership that causes you to fail, but it's often going to be stymied by that middle layer. So you incentivize them, you educate them, and you challenge them by going beyond them and enabling people beyond, at every level of the organization, to be active decision makers.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think slide I mentioned earlier where you have fear. I think the fear sits most at that level. More often than not, as Bryce said, most people have the most to lose there and the least opportunity to move on without a big step. You're probably at the most stable in your position in life with the most financial commitments and families, etc. at that level. So there's a lot at stake. And you're understanding and trying to learn how to play the landscape above while managing that around you and below. And obviously, it's a race with your peers, and instead of working together, it's often working against each other to get up that bell curve that we know exists. And I think we see a lot of risk aversion. And in the VUCA world, if you're risk averse, you're creating risk because you can't be risk averse. You have to, lean into risk. What was it? Someone said in London, lean into the suck. Was the last panelist they had. And he said, it sucks. Like, this sucks. This stuff is hard. What's going on outside today, every day, it's hard. And if you shy away from that, if you cower and try and, maintain the status quo, if you batten down the hatches, and we did a podcast with Alan Mulally, CEO of Ford and Boeing, recently said, if you do that, you're dead. You're a dead man walking, dead woman walking. In this day and age, if you think you're staying stationary and safe, you're not, because everything's going to move so fast ahead of you. When you come out, you'll be obsolete. And that goes with people in organizations. And I think it goes back to, again, educate your teams, engage them, educate those above you. All this it's not one individual layer. It's all the layers need this. We call it the red thread. They all need this capability that runs throughout, that they all understand, that they're all able to challenge. They all have permission to have discourse. And we've got one executive who walks in, he demands his team argue with him. I've worked with one individual, walked in, he wrote something on the board that we'd made up in the car park walking over. And he sat and he wrote on the board, said, right, what do you all think? Yes, great, boss. He's like, me and Marcus just made that up on the way over here. How dare you think that's great? None of you are thinking I'll be back tomorrow. Get a grip. Right, people are happy to just go along with these things. And these are senior managers on a lot of money. And it's not acceptable anymore. And if you think it is to behave that way, then don't be surprised when bad things happen. But conversely, if you do the good stuff and start showing that leadership that you're A, expected to show, and B, capable of, and this is all this leadership management debate. If you think I'm a manager here, the leaders are above me, you don't deserve to be working today. Right? It's leadership and management is a collective skill set capability that everybody's capable of. It's not a role specific outcome. And I think that's the frustrations you see often at all levels, because that still goes back to the 80s mindset of that's how these organizations are structured. And if you behave and operate and think that way, then it's only going to go one way.
So that point you just made there at the end, that example you gave, and surely things didn't change the following day when the leader walked out of the room and said, I'm basically disappointed in you all, I'll come back tomorrow.
We're all parents, well, not all parents, but Nothing worse as the kid, as his parents turn around, you're expecting, to be proper and something. Dad just goes, I'm not cross, I'm just disappointed. And he's like, oh, God, it's the worst feeling ever. So to do that to that team, they walked out and I went back in. I was like, guys, what are you doing? And they're like, what was he doing? I'm like, he's calling you all out. He's been here 3 months, he's been observing what's going on, he's not impressed. And now he just knows why. You've proven it. What are you all doing? And they were like, yeah. And they just got lazy. They'd got complacent. They got, as I mentioned earlier, mediocre. And it wasn't them, the culture of the organization. And when I talked about it, I was like, guys, are you clear what's going on? What do you mean? What's the strategy what we're trying to achieve here? No idea. Okay, let me go and educate the boss on that because he's not being clear coming down. Are you all upskilled and tooled in what you need? Have you got your teams capable of doing what they're doing? Oh, no, we're 30% short on this team and another percent short on the other team. I remember I took over an airfield 2007. I walked in running frontline operations at the busiest airfield in the UK to Afghanistan and Iraq. And I took over the operations room. There was 65% manned, woman, person, right? 35% under. And we had teams working 14 plus hour days with 1 day a week off back to back. And I was like, we're going to have an aviation incident here. There's going to be an accident caused somewhere. And I got in my car and I drove to headquarters Manning at Innsmouth. And me and the senior officer to me had a big chat. And we left. And by the time I got back to my base, my boss said, can I have a word? Yes, sir. He said, I'd say I'm disappointed, but I'm not. I'm really pleased. He said, what's going on? He said, I've just had the wing commander from the base call me up saying he didn't like the way you approached the subject and told him all the facts. I said, well, they are the facts. He said, I know, that's what I told him. And within 3 months, we were 100% manned. But it took his support from me with my data and my evidence and the fact that if you don't do this, cliff approaching, this is not going to end well. And when an aircraft crashes and it's on the front page news and 50 people are dead, I will not be shy in saying why that happened. And here's all the data that shows, and there's numerous incidents and near misses that have gone on already, but people are happy to just be complacent and accept that. And if you're middle management, which I was at the time, that's on you. To me, that's your physical, mental, heartfelt responsibility to do something about that. And if you don't, then you're complacent.
Love to have some more questions. You want to add to that? Sorry,
Yeah.
Bryce, go on.
I just want to go back to what you said, which is that, you said surely they didn't just change the next day. But it's amazing how quickly people can change if they're given permission to change. I go back to what I said. I think most of us, if our bosses walked in and made it clear that they really wanted to hear what we had to say and sat and listened to it, we would welcome that. And we come in the next day wanting to share more with them. I mean, if it was sincere and it was, it's a trap. No, it's not a trap. But I see this all the time. I mean, I was working one of the first big multinational corporations that I worked with after I wrote my last book, Red Teaming, was brought in by the CEO. And I'd given him an advanced copy of the book, and he'd read it, and he said, right, I want to make this part of our strategic planning and decision-making process. He said, I need you to get to our headquarters in 4 weeks. And I said, well, let me check my schedule. He said, no. He said, you need to get there in 4 weeks. He said, because I have my 300 senior leaders from around the world coming in for our annual meeting. I want to introduce this to them there with you sitting next to me on this. We were actually sitting in chairs just like this. He said, I want to do a fireside chat with you, he said. He said, we're going to get up on the stage. It's going to be the two of us. We're going to explain what red team thinking is. We're going to explain how it works. We're going to give them a little taste of it. And this is how we're going to launch it. So we played a little game with his 300 senior executives before I even explained how the program was going to work. It's called Lies We Tell Ourselves. It's a simple little game we've developed. And it goes like this. I explain that in every organization in the world has a series of comforting lies that it tells itself to protect itself from the hard truths that it doesn't want to deal with. And, it's unfortunate because it's the lies we tell ourselves that hold us back. And so if you want to move forward, you need to dispel this fog of BS that exists in the organization, shine a light on those hard truths that it's been created to shield you from, and address them. And so he had a foam football with a microphone in it. He said, I'm going to throw, Bryce just explained this. He says, I'm going to throw this out into the audience. Whoever catches it has to say what is one of the lies we tell ourselves. And he threw it out. The first executive who caught it, he gave an answer that was the equivalent of, what is your worst trait? It's I work too hard, CEO said, no, that's BS. He says, I'm serious. I want people to be honest. He said, throw that back to me. He threw it to one of his C-suite members. He says, if you don't answer this honestly, he says, you and I are going to be talking. And the guy said, our customers come first. There was dead silence in that room. 300 senior executives. You have to understand, this company's television ads literally said, our customers come first. And the CEO was sitting next to me, sat, looked up the ceiling, and he said, yeah, that's complete bullshit. And when he said that, the whole room just erupted in laughter. And then for the next 15, 20 minutes, they had a really robust conversation about if that's not true, because it isn't true. They're publicly traded companies. Our shareholders come first. So the question is, what's the right balance then? And how do we address this? Should we stop even saying it, And then when that was done, he threw it at somebody else, and somebody else said something that I'm not going to say because it would be a little bit too specific about this company. And same thing. It was like cathartic. It led to another 20-minute discussion about something core to the belief of this company that turned out not to be true. And then we broke for lunch. And I went to lunch, and I just sat down at a table, and one of the vice presidents of the company came in and asked if he could sit next to me. And he said, look, I'm really interested to hear what you're going to say in the afternoon about what this is and how it works. He said, but I want to tell you right now, he said, you've already changed the culture of this company. I said, I don't think so. I mean, we just played a little game. He said, no. He said, I can tell you about the conversations I've had in the past 15 minutes walking over to this table here. He said, because all of us in this room have things that we've been wanting to share about what's going wrong in the company, what could be done better. And everybody has been holding back for years. And that little game that we just played there just gave everybody permission to speak up. So I saw him 2 years later after I'd been doing a bunch of programs in the company, and I said, were you right? Did it really change that? And he said, no, seriously, he did. He said, when I left that day, I went and played that game with my team. And I challenged my team to tell me what are the lies we tell ourselves in our part of the company. And I told them, I just played this with the CEO. And I told them what the answers were. And they were shocked. So then they told me the hard truths in our organization. And he said, to this day, I get feedback from my team just by doing that one exercise that I would never have gotten before this. So I don't want to minimize how hard it can be, but it can also be surprisingly easy if it comes from the top. Yeah.
But after this one, could I please get some questions from women for balance?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. A lot of what you've said, you've talked about kind of finding the leadership. The leadership wants to change, and so it invites you in, and there's your into that. Of course, there's plenty of leaders out there that maybe need to change, but don't know they need to change, and so they're not going to invite you in. So what have you any kind of practical examples of where, in actual fact, this kind of thinking can come up more from the bottom rather than from the top?
Absolutely. I mean, so what we do as an organization is we have a couple of different things we do. We work with organizations, with companies, with government agencies, with militaries who bring us in. Senior leaders bring us in, like we were talking about there. Excuse me. But we also do open enrollment programs online around the world or in person. We just did one at Napier University yesterday here in Edinburgh. And the people who come to those programs are often people lower down in the organization who want to make a positive difference in the organization. And using these tools and techniques, they can begin to make a positive change at their level, the company. They don't need permission from the top of the organization. And what we find a lot is that once a group within a company begins to think differently, begins to have these kind of constructive challenging that Marcus was talking about before, that starts to have these healthy discussions, that starts to cultivate real diversity and inclusion, not tokenism, that it's like lighting a candle in a dark forest. I mean, pretty soon people are like, what is that over there? What's going on over there? Why is it light flickering over there? And so people say, what are you guys doing? Well, we're doing this. We learned some of these tools and we're using them on our teams. Well, could you teach me some of these tools? And then it becomes a kind of I hate to use this term in the world that we live in today, but it becomes a viral sort of thing, a positive virus, a virtuous virus that can spread through the organization that way. It doesn't have to come in at the top. It's a lot easier if it does, but it can be just as powerful. It comes in lower down in the organization. And by the way, parenthetically, if you look at my book was based on this very formal model of decision support red teaming that was developed originally by military and intelligence agencies that required a dedicated team of people trained to do these two things, and then they would be part of the org chart, the red team. And the reason we call what we do red team thinking now is because we've evolved away from that and focused instead on teaching these tools and techniques in ways that they can be used by individual leaders at any level of the organization, and that they don't require a separate team. They can be used on an ad hoc basis, either individually or in small groups, because if you can do that, then you can bring this in at any level of an organization. You don't have to ask for permission. So I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, I can just give 2 examples on that. Because again, it's nice to have that top cover always, and you get that aspiration that somebody upstairs cares. But we've had 2 examples where we had a lady come through our course who I'd known from years ago, and she had got quite a senior role, but junior, so she was managing a small team, but multiple layers above her. And she came through our program, went through the full program, absolutely loved it. She's like, I found my people. Because you've got so many fellow contrarians who come along to these events who want to speak up, but don't feel they have. And they sort of said, it's cathartic, because I thought it was just me. But you find fellow people who want to light that candle in the forest. And that was 14 months ago she came through. Obviously, COVID intermittent. We did the event in London. She showed up at the event that we did in London, similar to this. Met me afterwards. She said, by the way, my boss wants to speak to you. I was like, why? Am I in trouble? And she's like, no, she's been really impressed with what I've been doing with my team. And as Bryce said, she's been the candle in her company. And everyone's coming to her, and we tell people come through, don't go out and say, hey, we're doing red team thing and we're doing this new cool thing. Just do a little bit of cool stuff. Just start talking, start challenging in the right way. And people will come. And her boss is like, hey, how come you're doing this? You're delivering great stuff all the time. So eventually, when she's got the boss's confidence, she told her. And we've got a conversation with her next Monday, because she wants to enable all the other teams to be like that. And then we finished a program with the Canadian Revenue Agency, their tax department. And again, there was an ex-military guy in there running a small team. He'd been tasked with setting up a fraud and security department for the whole of the Canadian Revenue Agency. Junior guy in the organisation, but an ex-senior military guy. So he brought us in, we did a full program. And I just want to get what was said last week. So when we finished, we did the full champions program for them. So 12 modules over 6 days, but spread out over 4 weeks. And then after 2 months, we go back in and we say, right, how have things been going? What's been going on? How are you feeling about this? And when they do that, they came back and they said, we're struggling still with the leadership. They're seeing what we're doing. We've red teamed a few plans. They didn't like it because it's quite, they don't want their thing being called ugly when it's their baby. They said, but when we've done this, I said, how are you feeling? And they said, we feel empowered, enabled, challenged, great, happy, collegiate, and champions. And they said, if we can make the whole organization feel like that, then the organization would take care of itself. And that was just one team. But again, they were seeing other team members coming to them and asking them to go along, to sit in meetings and go, that stuff you did last time, can you just come along and sit in our meeting and ask those questions you did? Well, yeah, sure, but I'll come and teach your teams how to do that. We taught this with Pritam yesterday at Napier. He's free to go and do it now. Pritam can go tomorrow and teach his teams the tools he learned in one session. It is that simple. And as Bryce said, the impact it can have can actually be overnight, because you can instantly change behaviors using some of these capabilities. And it's like a rolling snowball. It'll just start getting bigger and bigger, and more people want to come and have a look and play. And it's a good thing to do. And that's that sort of self-enablement. So at that level, you can grow yourself, and then people will come down towards you rather than you trying to push it up.
Yeah.
Tom, I'm not making it up.
No. I think you have to be receptive to change. And I think, coming at it from an agile perspective, we were never really keen on planning, weren't we? We were kind of just want to get on and do it. But I think, recently I was looking at Agile 2.0. I don't know if any of you have looked at that. There's a lot more emphasis on planning there. And of course, with large scale Agile, there's obviously your PI plannings and all the rest and all the other elements that go with it. So planning hasn't disappeared, and I think if you look at these techniques, they are very, very useful. They involve a lot of critical thought, a lot of challenging assumptions, and I think that's always useful. And I think the tools that they provide are actually quite useful in helping you do that. I think there's a mathematician, George Box, that said all models are wrong, some are useful. And I think you have to use your head. You have to actually appraise them. You can't dismiss these things, but you have to basically pick the elements that work for you and make them work for you and apply them. So I think, suck it and see, give it a go. They are very useful in terms of simply, stopping the obvious things getting done when really, you should actually be looking at something totally different.
Before I go back to the audience for another question, so from your experiences on this boot camp, then, is there anything that jumps out at you that you want to do straight away? What's the thing that you want to be applying tomorrow?
Critical thinking is the main thing, really. It's to challenge things. Is to in Agile we have a saying, fail fast. It's the fastest way to find out that you're failing. You haven't even done something. I mean, Agile itself is a fairly limiting approach, isn't it? You can only deliver a sprint, and then you think, oh, that's not good. I have to do something differently. So this should it actually prevent you from even delivering the sprint. It's the fastest way of finding out. Those are very false assumptions. Those need to be challenged. We need to do things. We need to take we need to take another look at things and challenge what we're doing and think again.
I think what you just said is so powerful, and I'll tell you a story that's almost embarrassing about how true that is. I was working with a large corporation, and we'd done several programs with them. We trained a lot of their people, but they also were bringing us in on major projects. We never red team things for other people. We lead them through the exercise because we don't believe that we have the answers. We think they have the answers. It's all about surfacing them. So there was a particularly thorny strategic initiative that they were dealing with, and they said, we'd really like you guys to come and fly out and help us analyze this. We're not sure if our people, are up to analyzing this on their own yet. So we said, okay, we'll come out. We flew out there, and we started using one tool that we teach. We got 18 minutes into what was supposed to be a week-long session of analyzing this major strategy. And 18 minutes in, not us, but their people using with us just facilitating tool, one of the lead people on said, why are we even doing this? This strategy, it duplicates something we're doing in another part of the company already. And we're gonna waste so much time and energy and money with us sitting here for a week analyzing something that's already going to happen in another part of the company anyways. It's already started. Why don't we just see if that works? And if it does, duplicate it in this other part of the company. And if it doesn't, then we'll have dodged a bullet. And I said, well, why don't we call, the executive vice president who asked us to do this and see what they thought. They came down. We took a break for an hour. They came down, heard out the team. 5 minutes. He said, right, okay, well, thanks for coming, guys, But I mean, that's the thing, is to your point, you don't need to go through this whole exercise all the time. Sometimes it just yields such obvious things. It just saves yourself from doing the whole sprint in the first place.
But it's not obvious if you're not looking. Yeah. And that's half the problem. If you're not looking for these things because you're not being allowed, and your head's down, blinkers, and we're all under the cosh of speed. All the metrics now about how fast you're going, what's your velocity, output. And with that, if you're not measuring the risk, if you're not measuring morale, if you're not measuring defects, etc., then again, cliff approaching. So it's being able to look, and these capabilities give you that option of taking the blinkers off and just looking at things with a fresh pair of eyes. And if you can't see it, people left and right of you will see something different that you never will, because none of us can see everything. But as a group, as a collective, that wisdom of the crowd will allow something to be surfaced that will either trigger the capability or will just surface the great idea of thing that nobody else saw.
Got about 10 minutes, then I'll probably need a few minutes just to wrap things up and bring it to a close. Good to take another question from the audience.
Hi. You talked about leadership being about relationships, being close to your team, getting close to what they're up to. Have you any thoughts on the new challenges that remote working might bring?
Can we go first? Happily.
I'll just quickly say it, and then you can leave it to you. I think the Agile community is certainly toying with that. I think it's part of one of the principles, isn't it? Face-to-face communication is the most effective way. It's the gold standard, and how do we try and duplicate that, replicate that in a hybrid working environment? We're still succeeding. We're still doing things. So if you go to any of the Agile conferences, you'll see it's a hot topic, hybrid working. And so I think when we're still seeing how it pays out, because we have organisations desperate to get their employees back in again. It's all that kind of tacit knowledge that exchanged over the water cooler that you've absolutely no chance of doing on a Zoom call, although people are trying to do that. So right now, there's a lot of discussion in that area, and I think we're just going to have to see how it goes.
I sort of think there's two things on this. So, pre-COVID, we've been spending years trying to remote work and master that, and then within 2 weeks, we're all forced to do it, and we all did it really well. So it proves you've got that capability to adapt when required. And then we moved into the whole, how do you then manage and lead your people while they're remote and in a little Zoom box? And I think that goes back to the capability, the tooling, the techniques, the processes you use. So having the right platforms, organizations where I'm in, where they're using Mural and Menti and all these different capabilities that actually work and allow people to collaborate. And we moved all of our training online. When we were in London 2.5 years ago, when the balloon went up, Bryce had to leave early. We sat down to do we shut the business down? It's been great knowing each other. And we said, no, we need this. So we spent 3 months migrating everything into a digital capability. And we actually find it better, if not more capable than it is doing face-to-face, because of the technology with the tools that you have, if you get the right tools. But then I also think, bring people together, but not to work. And I did an off-site with a large oil and gas company about 3 weeks ago in London. First time some people had met each other for 18 months. And we didn't come together to work. They just came together to be together, to socialise, to talk about what your dog's called, what your favourite drink is. Are you going to see Maverick this weekend? And it just spent a whole day there. And at the end of the day, someone stood up and said, this was absolute gold. And most leaders go, but you did no work today. Shocking. That team was far more effective the next day. So that's slowing. I've got a great slate, slow down to speed up. By slowing down for that day and taking the time to work together, the next time they're on a remote call, they're collaborating far more effectively. There's that bond of people. Life's about relationships. So that capability is there. And I think one of the biggest failings of executive leadership today is their mishandling of the return to work problem. It's a complex problem. And right now, there's very simple, clear answers. Either you're all back to work, or do the 60-40, or do whatever you like. None of those work. None of them. You have to do a tailored, absolutely bespoke thing for your organization. And to get to that thing, you have to experiment. It's complex. And if you're not engaging your people with that and seeing what works for everybody, and it's not going to work for everybody, anybody who thinks that 100% people should be happy all the time is delusional, right? You're in a team. So if you can get 80% solution that works for the majority, that's a great thing. But I don't care whether people want to work remote all the time or not. Life is about relationships. It's what we do best as humans. And that interaction, and we've seen that again back on the road this week, just great on Zoom, but just having that interaction with people, that offline chat over a coffee, that way you talk to each other. Then when you do it on Zoom, it's a very different organizational bond that you have with each other. And I just think it's something that's really not been considered well. And then also where they have mandated, again, back to the big oil and gas place, they've not upgraded. So for 2 years, they've done nothing. Everybody get back to work. What have we got now? We've built a call centre because some people come into work, some don't. The briefing rooms aren't capable. Everyone's got better tech at home. So you've got people now sat at their desks, 10 in a row, having one-to-one Zooms with their colleagues who were elsewhere who didn't come in. And it's a racket. They're like, will you be quiet, please? Shut up, Bryce. I can't hear him. Well, you shut up. I'm like, how is this effective? And their work is going, do, do, do. And the people are tense and then people just don't come in. And then the boss, well, I told you all to come in. And it's this vicious circle, and you can see it going down, and nobody's just stopping and going, right, what's this about? Because I said from the top, and because people at the bottom aren't either empowered to speak up or the top aren't coming down to see. Just go and sit in the office for one day and listen and watch what goes on. And you'll then get that appreciation of what's going on.
You know, what you can't do, and I mean every company in the world, is go back to how things were. You know, the cat's out of the bag. Everybody knows that you can work from home now. And, you know, I'll tell you a funny story. I used to be a journalist. I used to be a business journalist. And I used to cover the tech industry in Silicon Valley during the first .com boom back in the 1990s. Way back when, for those of you who are young. And I remember when I was assigned by my boss to do a story, major exploration of the possibility of remote work. And keep in mind, this is in Silicon Valley. And so I went and I found companies that were already doing, you know, 1 day a week at home and stuff like this and hybrid workplaces. And I wrote a big story about it. And my boss, oh, this is great. It's going on the front page and stuff. I said, Chris, this is great. I said, you know what? Can I work from home 1 day a week? Because I think I would get... She looked at me and she said, are you crazy? I said, we literally just, the whole point of this story is literally telling companies that they should consider doing this. And you're going to tell me you're not willing to consider doing this? She said, I can't yell at you if you're at home. That's literally what she said.
She knew you well.
She knew me well. That was in 1999. Every boss I had in journalism, and I went to bigger and bigger papers after that, I asked if I could work from home 1 day a week. Not a single one did. Now keep in mind, this is a job in which your job literally involves not being in the office most of the time, going out. And you know, if there's a major news story or something, you go out and you go to a cafe and write your news story and file it and stuff. But could you work from home 1 day? No. Because you won't be productive. Because you'll just be sitting around distracted. So the thing is that everybody knows that's BS now. Because everybody knows that we can work from home. So the challenge is not whether we should come back to the office or whether we should work from home. The challenge is what, as Marcus said, is what is the right mix for each organization. But if your organization says, no, we're coming back, they're doomed because, you know, people are leaving their jobs in droves. I mean, look what happened at Goldman Sachs a few months ago when the CEO of Goldman Sachs announced that everyone was going back to work 5 days a week or else. Half of the employees did not show up. That's Goldman Sachs. So, you know, if people at Goldman Sachs are willing to rebel like a bunch of Trotskyists, you know, or something like that, you know, I mean, imagine what's going to happen elsewhere. So, but what I would say is, in addition to, as Marcus suggested, you know, figuring out what's right for your organization and recognizing that what's wrong is going back to how things were. I really think that this conversation about what the way forward for work is a great opportunity to deal with some of the stuff we were talking about earlier today, about trust and listening and distributed decision making. Because one of the ways that you can deal with the organization's anxiety about letting people continue to work from home is to put in place systems that encourage collaboration, encourage dialogue on the teams, to say things like, you know, once a week, we're going to pick a topic that we're struggling with as a team, and we're going to use the fact that we're working remotely to allow everyone to use Mural or Menti to anonymously post what they think the best answer is for dealing with that. And then we're going to use dot voting or something to pick what we think anonymously is the best of those ideas. And then we'll discuss that as a team. That's powerful stuff that you should be doing anyways, but now you have an excuse to do it because you've got to figure out how to continue to collaborate working remotely. So I think it's a great opportunity. I am so excited, actually, for where we're at. with this change in thinking about work, because it opens the door for thinking about work, not just about where you're working, but how you're working.
Coming up on time, I'd like to finish with one question just to close. So, we're seeing a lot of disruption, mass disruption, global disruption. We've all been disrupted. Some quick thoughts from all three of you around how organisations can be deliberately disruptive. What does that look like, and what would you recommend that they all do as succinctly as you can?
Quick one, pre-mortem. Dr. Gary Klein created this 30 years ago. Fail. Write the headline that you're going to read tomorrow morning that states your organisation has failed spectacularly. How did that happen? And then work backwards and engage all of your people in that, and they'll come up with a list of all the reasons, all the things that could cause that to happen, and then work out how you make sure those things don't happen. And it's fun, it's scary, and people say, Marcus, I don't want to do that because it's negative, failure, we don't want that. It's painful doing a pre-mortem. I said, try doing a post-mortem. Yeah. So that would be my advice, pre-mortem.
I think one of the things would be to challenge everything. Ask yourself, are you in the right business? Look at opportunities to the side, downstream, upstream. I remember a few years ago, 15 years ago, going to Finland, and we were doing some work for a company, and I went to the washrooms, and in the washrooms, a paper towel dispenser, and stamped on that paper towel dispenser was Nokia. Nokia were in the paper, the heavy engineering industry, and they ended up, we know where they ended up, but prior to that, they had a very, very successful mobile phone business. Now, you have to ask yourself, what do mobile phones and telecoms have anything to do with, making paper and processing timber? So it's that kind of innovative thinking and critical questioning, I think. You need to look at opportunities that exist beyond your current domain. Look beyond that and look at what your assets are. There are tons of business school models that will tell you can do this and that, but the basic principle is look at all the industries, look at what your assets are, try and find a match, and look at new opportunities that perhaps the people might not think there might be anything there, but you never know.
I love that story about Nokia. It reminds me of when I was a journalist and I was later covering the automobile industry. And I had the opportunity to sit down with the head of Mazda's production system. Now, a lot of people have heard of the Toyota production system, but most people haven't heard of the Mazda production system. Toyota sends its people to Mazda to study the Mazda production system because Mazda is one of the most agile and nimble and flexible manufacturing companies in the world, because they have a smaller plant, but they have one major plant, and they build all their cars, sports cars, vans, subcompacts on one assembly line, which no one else does. And they've always been flexible. So I was really pleased that after much trying, I got to sit down with him. He was out giving a speech at a university in the United States, and I went and met with him. And I said, tell me what the origins of the Mazda production system are. And he said, well, when we were producing corks in the 1880s, I said, wait. I said, what? And he said, he said, Matsuda, which is the actual name of the company, Mazda is the trade name. Matsuda Corporation started producing synthetic cork when there was a cork shortage in the 1880s because of a global fungal disease in cork trees, and there was nothing to cork sake bottles with, and so Matsuda got in the business of creating synthetic cork, and he started to explain to me how they created all of the principles of the Mazda production system back in the 1880s to make cork, and when the cork blight was cured, the trees got over it. They said, "Oh, what else can we make with this production system? Why don't we make mechanized bicycles?" And then it became trikes, and then it became cars and stuff like that. So I mean, it's so easy in this world. People always say, "Oh, we're going to end up like the buggy whip manufacturers." You know what happened to some of the buggy whip manufacturers? They became manufacturers of leather upholstery for automobiles. Seriously, look it up. You know, you're not doomed to fail because technology changes or your industry changes. But the reason I asked Seth for a copy of my book, and I feel like this was teeing up a softball question for me here, is the subtitle of the UK edition of my book is, in fact, Transform Your Business by Thinking Like the Enemy. And to me, that's the answer. If you want to avoid being disrupted, disrupt yourself. Think about your business as though you were a competitor, looking at your business saying, how could we do this better? You know who does this incredibly well? Amazon. Most people don't realize this. I talk about this in the book. Amazon has internal benchmarking teams, but they don't do what normal benchmarking teams do, where they benchmark their competitors and then try to equal them. They try to figure out how they can disrupt their own business. If we were not Amazon, if we were a startup, if we were coming to tackle Amazon's part of this business, how would we disrupt how would we do it? What would we do differently? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where's the thing Amazon's missing? And then they do that to themselves. That's why they keep staying ahead. And you need to think like this if you want to succeed today. I quote in here also the letter that Larry Page wrote to Google's employees the day that they announced the formation of Alphabet, explaining why they were doing it. And he says in here, continuous improvement isn't enough anymore. It's not, forget about succeeding. It's not enough to survive anymore. He said in the technology industry, and we're all in the technology industry now, you have to make these great disruptive leaps forward if you want to stay in business, because if you don't, someone else will do it to you. So that's the advice right there I give is really that. Think like your enemy. Pretend you're the guys or gals in the garage looking at your company and saying, what could we do better? And then do it before someone else does, because if you wait, someone else will disrupt you.
That's it. Fantastic. I don't need that. No, I think we're right up on time. I thought it was a fantastic discussion. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Very insightful. Loved the anecdotes. Very entertaining. And yeah, I think that all remains is to thank Bryce Hoffman, Marcus Dimbleby, and Preetam Cheetham for Preetam Cheetha, really. Got tongue-tied there, for their time and their admirable efforts at answering the questions. And join me in giving them a round of applause and thanking them for everything.
And by the way, I wasn't trying to sell you a copy of my book. We're going to give you all a copy.
There you go. Can't say fairer than that. I think we are up on time. I'd just like to do a couple of other quick shout-outs and then we'll let you all get on your way, or you're welcome to enjoy another beer if it's okay with Alan. He's nodding in my general direction. Just to thank Alan, Gordon and the team at Global Logic for kindly hosting us this evening. We couldn't have done this without them. Greatly appreciated. Our thanks again to Marcus, Bryce and our sponsor Naked Agility for providing the drinks and food. And a shout out for Product Forge who helped us kindly live stream the event this evening. So we couldn't have done it with any of them. And last but not least, your good selves for joining us this evening and participating and giving up your time and making it feel amazing, because this is the first in-person event Future Work Scotland have certainly done in 2.5 years, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. So thank you all for making it a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Seth.